Deluded, I'm back again.
Come on, Ian, man. Come on.
And now that Ian Wright's introduction's done, people, Deluded, I'm back again. I've got my good friend Tom. All I've been hearing on YouTube is get Tom on, man. Get Tom. It's pre-season. We want to hear you lot talk and whatnot. I hope I've delivered. How you doing, my friend, man? I was watching your stream.
Very good. It's weird you're getting so many demand. I've never been in demand before, so I appreciate that.
No, you're a man that I can't understand it, but I wouldn't say you polarize opinion, but you kind of, because we're kind of from the same school of thought, we both kind of get the same kind of flack, maybe for thinking a bit logically, not necessarily going against the grain, but not losing our heads and our hats for no absolute reason. And that's where I actually want to kick off things, man. I'm sure you've spoken about this at length and whatnot, but I have to ask you, what do you make of Calafiori firstly, and why is it taking so long?
Yeah, this does seem like the most likely deal that Arsenal will get done this summer at the moment. But it is obviously dragging on a bit, which is obviously increasing that feeling of frustration for Arsenal supporters, because at the moment you want to be able to point to something that Arsenal have got done. And exactly. I get that. I think that the situation is a combination of things. The sell-on clause of Basel seems to be something of an issue, because that's bumping up the price. From Bologna's side of things, they want to maximise as much value as they can. The player is very much, aligned with moving to Arsenal. I think, from what I understand, personal terms aren't an issue whatsoever, and I kind of already agreed on a 5-year deal or so. So it does seem like, and it felt like a matter of time until this would get done, and it still seems to be a case of it being a matter of time, but we're just kind of waiting for that news of a breakthrough between Arsenal and Bologna, and hopefully that will come, because it's a lot of effort and resources to put into a deal if you don't then get it done.
I think you're bang on the money, and for me, it feels like the calm before the storm, because I've seen the comments on my channel, so I can only imagine on yours is, Edu's not doing nothing, Arteta's not doing nothing, we're resting on our laurels, etc. For me, it feels the calm before the storm. Now, if there is a reality where for whatever reason it doesn't happen, then of course we have to go back to the drawing board. But as you said there, we've agreed personal terms, so we've done our due diligence in the player for like his willingness to sign for us, and it just seems a case of, for me, dotting I's and crossing T's with Bologna. Rightly so, we're a British club. Bologna know that British clubs have money in comparison to the other leagues. As you said, with the 50% sell-on clause, that's evidently a factor, in great business from Basel. I don't know why Bologna signed off on that. So I think it will get done. I'm happy to see where we're at when we do sign him. What do you make of his signing, though?
Yeah, I think it's an important one. I think that it's an area of the team where I think maybe is not being talked about as much, because we all want to see strikers and midfielders and wingers come into the club. But actually, last season Arsenal got incredibly lucky with the reliability of their defenders. Saliba was playing every single minute of every single game. Gabriel barely missed a game other than those first few matches of the season. Ben White, of course, despite some issues in his form in the first half, as soon as he, had that trip to Dubai, unsurprisingly so, top up the tan, and Ben White's brilliant again. But he was excellent, man. Indeed, he was excellent, in the second half of the campaign as well, and also didn't face any real injury issues whatsoever. The left-back position was very fluid. We had Zinchenko, we had Kivior, we had Tomiyasu, we had Timber for the first game, and of course he will come back into the fold this season as well. So that left-back position looks like the area where, you can probably find something more stable, and Calafiori certainly, I think, would come into that position with the style that he plays. I know he's played the majority of his games at centre-half for his country, but for Bologna and previously for Roma as well, he played a lot at left-back, and I think stylistically he suits that type of role that Arteta likes from a defender in a fullback position, being more of kind of a hybrid centre-half, if you will. He's very good going forwards. I think he ranks amongst the highest goal contributors in terms of assists for his position in Serie A. And he likes to progress play. He likes to always be looking forwards. He doesn't have an issue stepping out like Saliba can do at times. So there's some similarities with him as well. But yeah, I think the main thing is that I think having 8 defenders is an important factor. And because we got so fortunate with the lack of injuries in those areas last season, the fact that we only had 7 plus Cedric, who barely counts, wasn't for me enough still. And we were playing a little bit closer to the edge than I'd like.
I think you said a lot of gems and nuggets in that, in the sense of course, we've been very fortunate. It's been well known. Benjamin White is known to kind of not necessarily lie about injuries, because he's a good competitor. As you said, Saliba played every minute, and we hope that is the case. But we need to be open to, if there is any injuries, it's like a chef cutting their hands, that we can kind of react. And for me, I think Calafiori tops up what we already have, and that was spoilt for choice defensively, respectfully. But you kind of touched on it there. The Cedrics, the Rob Holding, Holdings, the Callum Chambers, the Mustafis, the Maries. We've come a long way. We've got great defenders individually in their own right. We've got great collective defenders. And for me, why I'm even more beneficial to see a player like this is signing players is one thing, but we've got a completely different outlook, as we've shown in the last 2-3 years defensively, from at the moment Kai Havertz all the way down to the defenders. So I'm happy with that. I'm sure you've been asked this, and I don't know where you're at with it because I don't know where I'm at because I'm not Mikel Arteta, but on the topic of good questions, you could say Calafiori's first choice. He's going to be signed for 40, 50 odd million. He is naturally left-footed. But then you've got Mr. Timber. You still have Zinchenko on paper. I don't think he'll be first choice, but there is, I don't think we can downplay what Tomiyasu brings to the table. And of course, a lot of these players are versatile. So what would be what do you think would be the back five as much as you can, bearing in mind you're not Mikel Arteta? And what would be your first choice back five personally as a fan?
I think that from the off, if Calafiori comes in, it probably still will be Timber actually that starts on the left-hand side, because obviously he's been with the side a lot longer. He's waited a very long time, of course, to make that real integration, and he's showcased at left back what he's got. But I actually think that Timber's role may turn more so onto the right-hand side, and you may see at times greater rotation at centre half, with Saliba, as he's shown for France, being very good on the left side of a back two. And then obviously Ben White maybe moving inside with Timber then at right back. So Gabriel gets some rest, which is needed, at times. And it is important that happens. We've got extra 2 Champions League games at a minimum in the first stage of the competition this season.
Facts.
We want to go further in the cup competition. So having different options in those back 4 positions is going to be important. You still keep that consistency and the understanding, but you also need to build new connections between players and establish new, partnerships as well. But I think that, it will be White, Saliba, Gabriel, Timber to start the season. And then as the season goes on, I think we might see Calafiori, if indeed that is successful, get opportunities at left back to start. I do think that Timber, from what in the small amounts that we've seen, has been very, very impressive, and there is a lot of hype and expectations surrounding him. And I think that I really enjoyed his Community Shield performance against Manchester City last season at left back. I thought he dealt with things very, very well. And it wasn't, of course, until he came off that they actually scored with Cole Palmer.
We remember. You're right.
So, I think that there is something both defensively and offensively very impressive about Timber, and a balanced kind of figure there. So his role in the team next season is going to be good. But I think Ben White's got to look over his shoulder at Timber a bit as well.
I think you're bang on the money, because last season, that's where I was thinking with Benjamin White. Obviously, Timber played left back in pre-season and he was doing his thing. But I thought, you might be direct competition for Ben White. And Ben White reacted well, as a lot of these players. Again, Ben White's been improving year in, year out. But at the same time, naturally, as you said, if you're looking over your shoulder and you're of the mentality of that, we know it's a collective game and whatnot. But fundamentally, I want to play. There's only one spot. I think Ben White reacted well. And I agree with you with Timber. I think Timber, I describe him as a unicorn. And I think as good or as bad as last season was, between Thomas Partey's injury and Timber, kind of going back to what you said about the issues at left back, I think we lost a lot of what we could see. And I do think we have to kind of, not that I'm not a physio, bro, but it doesn't look like Timber is struggling with his ACL problems. It looks like he's kind of, I won't quite say over it, but it looks like he's cool. And I also think with Calafiori, I do think we need to remember he's 22 years of age. He's going to have to learn what Arteta wants of him individually and collectively. And again, like, as good as he is, playing for Arsenal has got a completely different sort of expectation. And I'm sure he's got a lot of weaknesses in his game that Mikel Arteta wants to churn out. So I'm more than happy with it. And you touched on something there with Timber at right back, and Timber at right back, with the underlaps and the overlaps with Bukayo Saka and Martin Odegaard, that would be great. I think with Timber's fitness and with Calafiori, I just want to see stability on the left-hand side. We've seen a lot of turnover in midfield. Of course, that kind of correlates to the struggles of Martinelli, and you said with left back. So it is a bit of a technical one. I do want to ask you, though, because, again, we're going to America next week. And I think in the last 2 years, we did have some signings by now. We got them in early. The rhetoric we hear about the club is getting these signings in early. How much do you think pre-season preparation is the same but also affected? Because obviously you've had the Euros, you've had Copa America, we haven't got signings in. Not sure when Declan Rice and Saka return. But how is it different for you this summer?
Well, yeah, those 2 players you mentioned are likely to miss the entirety of the tour. Wow. Saka, Rice, Ramsdale, and Raya are expected to return.
Congrats to him as well.
Yes, indeed. Frustratingly so. Congrats
Yeah,
to
bittersweet,
David Moyes.
100%.
It is bittersweet, absolutely. Whereas the likes of Havertz, players that were eliminated by the quarterfinals and before, are more likely to return during the tour. So they should get some involvement. Jorginho, Zinchenko, other ones. And then, of course, you've got Saliba, who's a little bit in between because he got to the semi-finals. Maybe we'll see him. Maybe we won't see him on the tour. It may be that he waits or they give him time, but there's a chance maybe he could be involved. We'll have to wait and see. But in general, Arteta has spoken in the press conference he had before the Everton game regarding signings. He said, obviously, managers want to get signings through the door as soon as possible. That's the dream scenario for managers, but it's not always possible.
It's not always the reality, no.
It is the reality of having 2 international tournaments at the start of the window. It's the reality of a lot of those players then going on their breaks and not wanting to worry about their futures until after they've come back from their holiday. Some players like Benjamin Sesko prefer to get things done sooner, and that's why he made the decision to stay at Leipzig and sign a new deal well ahead of the European or a few days rather before the head of the European Championships. Where other players are more open to seeing what kind of opportunities are going to come to them throughout the course of the entire window because they are open to different opportunities. And also, I think that some people get very latched onto what we see on the surface. I often describe the transfer window as an iceberg. It's like what you see on the surface is a tiny proportion of the reality of what's actually going on below the surface. Even, from a perspective of someone who gets, my little tidbits here and there, speaking to a few people with, links very strongly to the club and within the club as well. You are only given clarification and guidance on certain things, and the club aren't going to want things to leak. They are going to want to keep the majority of what they're doing as hidden as possible to strengthen their negotiating.
They tried to cut down on that since Arteta's come into the club.
Oh, he 100% has. Like the leaks that used to come out of Arsenal compared to now, it's night and day. We used to talk about like every player under the sun gets linked to Arsenal, but while there's a lot that still do, it's nowhere near the frequency I find now. And I'm doing these transfer shows as you do, year on year on year. I'm talking about far less players these days when it comes to Arsenal. It used to be a new player almost every single day that would be able to mention.
Yeah, that would have been easy for the content, but yeah, you're right.
And that's because not only are the club now in a position where there's a whole different setup, a whole different principle when it comes to this, different people involved that Arteta feels he can trust, and he, seemingly has weeded out some of the leaks that we knew of as well. So there is far less, and that outlets aren't necessarily willing, especially in areas where sadly there's some fabrication of stories with certain players, or what you sometimes get is maybe agents drumming up interest in a player by mentioning Arsenal's name sometimes, which does happen mainly abroad. So it'll be interesting to see if indeed when the tour's going and as holidays come to an end, where that really will pick up. But from an Arsenal pre-season point of view, the players, actually, some of them ended their holidays earlier to go to Marbella with Arteta, which is obviously a really good sign, a really good show of ambition from some of those players and the preparedness of Arteta as well. It's good to hear when Arteta did the interview with the Arsenal website about how players were surprised to see how the level's gone up already. Their expectations of players have gone up. Exactly, and that's what you want, and that has to be. And I think that Arteta ended the season with those words after the Everton game where he said, "Don't be satisfied with this." And that's what Arsenal have got to be, is not satisfied with second and pushing to try and get first. And I think that even though there's some disruption to pre-season, it's obviously the same for a lot of other teams as well, especially the teams that are going to be challenging for the titles. So we are in a similar boat to them and can't necessarily use that as any kind of excuse when it gets to the start of the season. We need to be on it going into that Wolves game. I think we will be on it. But I also think there are some players like Saka that need to be managed maybe a little bit more carefully as we go into the new season, perhaps offered slightly longer rest than maybe some others do.
I'm with you with that, and I think it's an age-old thing in that. I agree with you. I think the players need to be rested, but I do think when I watch the press conferences, especially in relation to Saka, it does see. I want to pick my words wisely, but it feels like Mikel Arteta can become a bit animated, a bit annoyed, a bit like when he's talking to the journalists, a bit like a frustrated parent talking to his or her kid, and it's like he always comes out and says the best players play 70-odd games. They do this, they do that, which I don't disregard at all, but I do think next season Saka needs to be afforded rest when there is time. But at the same time, does the player necessarily want rest? Not that we can't afford to rest him, but if we've got a Premier League fight to do against City where we can't really drop points, if we've got a must-win Champions League, it's not really going to happen in that regards. With all that being said, do you feel that this is a pivotal summer for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal? And I want to pick my words lightly because we've done the bulk of our shopping really in the last 2 years, and it feels like we're at that point where it's not that we have to cherry pick, but we kind of have to cherry pick certain positions that kind of uptake us. And even if we do sign all the players we want and you want in the world, it might not be enough to beat City. But do you think this is a summer where, beyond the obvious, this is now where we can put a real marker down and simply put, hope is third time lucky?
It's interesting this summer. It's the reason it's interesting is because obviously for me, for the first time, we don't have that clear and obvious candidate that we've had in previous windows. Last year it was Declan Rice. The year before that it was Gabriel Jesus. The year before that it became to be Ben White. That was that key marquee target from that window amongst 4 or 5 others as well. And the year before that, it was Houssem Aouar and Thomas Partey, and we got one of those two by deadline day. Houssem Aouar, by the way, I think he's still with Roma now.
I think he's gone to the Middle East. Quite the fall from grace from him, man. Yeah. That's a player we won't be signing for once.
Absolutely. So I do think that this summer makes it difficult for Arsenal to go and get the players they ultimately would have wanted. I think the key player that Arteta would have wanted, other than Seshko at the beginning, and that was more of a market opportunity than anything else. It wasn't like we see this guy as being the guy. It was the case of we see this as a very talented young striker who's available for a very reasonable price because of his release.
This could be gold here.
This could be a really good opportunity for us. So that's why they were interested in him, but ultimately he's decided to stay. And they will keep track of Seshko, moving forwards, because a striker is not a top priority for us this window. Kai Havertz changed that rhetoric entirely with his performances at the end of last season. He only spent a third of the campaign playing there and ended up with an amount of goals that, had he been Arsenal's penalty taker, he would have finished second in the Golden Boot race.
Had a great run towards the end of the year, man. I won't forget that time, man.
That's what we're talking about in terms of his performances. And quite rightly, you should adapt based upon the performances of the players that are already there. There's always this, I call it the magpie effect of supporters, where they want the shiny new toy. That's what we always want. We always think the grass is greener, but there's not necessarily a chance of that. And Arsenal never want to do things by half. They never want to just react in a window too frivolously. They don't want to do things for the sake of doing things. If they sign a player, it's because they have done extensive work, or they believe that a sudden opportunity is too good to miss out on, like they did last year with Havertz, for instance, who suddenly became available and has obviously proven in the end, despite some skepticism quite rightly at the start and a slower pickup, has proven to be a good move for Arsenal in the end. So I think that what we're going to be looking at is Arsenal obviously trying to be savvy and patient in the market and looking for those opportunities when they arise, perhaps later on as the dominoes start to fall, because City haven't signed anyone bar Savio, who is obviously part of
their group kind of thing anyway. So it's like you're signing your own players.
Signing in inverted quotation mark. And then Liverpool, who have brought in a brand new man. I mean, if I was a Liverpool fan right now, looking at their team, thinking, we finished off the pace in the title race. That is our aim for next season. We know we've got shortcomings in defence and midfield. We've brought in a new manager. We're now nearly at the end of July, 2/3 of the way through July, and he's not brought any players in.
They haven't signed the damn player, really.
So if I was Liverpool, I'd be panicking. But I think that's actually, maybe that is a bitter indication of where we're at as a transfer window, where things are at. And the clubs like Man United, Chelsea, Spurs, yes, they've done business, but we're not in competition with these clubs anymore. They're not who we're looking at. We're looking at City, we're looking at Liverpool, we're looking at how can we close the gap. And we have the opportunity to be patient in this window, because it's much, much harder to improve a team that finished 2 points off the title winners last season than it is a team like United, who finished in their worst Premier League position of all time. So it's far harder for you to then go and get the players that you think. So in a market where those players, again, are not particularly standout or forthcoming. So I think the way that Arsenal will look to change this window is by raising their floor rather than their ceiling. And I think we'll see players like Smith Rowe, Nketiah, Nelson moved on, and Arsenal bringing in players that they feel are better than them and can give greater competition across positions in the squad.
You said it there. How do you feel about the Highlanders leaving? Because me, I'm a big fan of Smith Rowe. I think it's probably best for all parties. But what do you make of Smith Rowe? Because apparently a bid's been rejected from Fulham. What would you think is fair value for him? And how do you feel about Nelson and Nketiah? I think, Nketiah has been linked with a whole bunch of clubs, and seems like Nelson could go West Ham.
Yeah, so the bid from Fulham was between 25 and 30 million pounds, is what I'm led to believe. And when we were subject to a bid in 2022 from Aston Villa at 30 million pounds. That was a second bid. The first one at 25 was rejected. So we're in a very similar ballpark. And that at that time was kind of Smith Rowe's peak as a player. We didn't really see him get much better or much worse than that summer in 2022, because in 22-23, obviously Martinelli gradually pushed him out into that title race inside. And this season, of course, he's barely featured because of a combination of injuries
on the peripheral
things of other players, and Leandro Trossard's arrival as well. and Kai Havertz as well, of course, who was playing in that left 8 role for the majority of the campaign. So his situation, despite being as a profile nowhere near as kind of attractive as a prospect as he was in 2022, I still think Arsenal should be looking to try and get slightly more than that offer that Aston Villa offered in 2022, which was 30 million. So I'd be looking for about 35 minimum for Smith Rowe, as close to 40 as you can perhaps get. And I hope that Arsenal are doing that. And because Fulham have come into a bit of money with the Palhinha sale, I think that they have the scope to do that type of business. So I hope that we do hold them to that. There's also interest from Crystal Palace as well, which hopefully will, help to create some sort of a bidding war and bump up the price. Exactly. So that's Smith Rowe, and I think for him, for Arsenal, the right thing is for him to move and get minutes and play away from Arsenal and kind of just pull the Arsenal band-aid off, because he's very attached to Arsenal. It's going to be very difficult for him to leave. But the reality is, no matter how good he is, and he is a good player, stylistically, there isn't really a place for him in this Arteta system, I feel. I think he's a great 10 that's a driver of the ball into the box, not a creative 10 like an Ozil or an Ødegaard type, but more of kind of your more direct 10s that you get that almost turn into something of a second striker at times, because he is great against the box for scoring goals. And I think if he's utilised in that position in a team, you'll probably see far more, which will obviously then lend itself to people saying, see, we shouldn't have sold Smith Rowe.
You know how football fans are.
The reality is different. And Nketiah and Nelson, with all the love and respect for what they've done, Nketiah's goal against Man United kept in the title race, Nelson's goal against Bournemouth, all the love and respect for what they've done, they simply aren't good enough for what Arsenal want to do and where they want to go. And so moving them on is best. West Ham are keen on Nelson, said to be 15 to 20 million pounds is the asking price. I think if we can get that, that's excellent business for Arsenal, and to get 15 to 20 million in for Nelson. If you can get 25 million plus for Nketiah, also really good business. I think that you get 40 million, perhaps 70 million for those three, who
on the fringes as well.
Most people would say aren't going to be getting into the first team. That's Calafiori and another signing, perhaps Marino as well. That's two level raises in terms of the floor, to bring in and add quality to the team that you pay off with three Highlanders who are all pure profit. There's nothing on like accounting books, there's no transfer fees. It's all pure profit on the books, which obviously looks really good for us as well.
Do you think that we should be moving on Reece Nelson without bringing in a winger?
It's a good question. I think that you've got Trossard, Martinelli, you've got arguably Jesus as well. Saka. I also know that Nwaneri can play in those wide areas, and I think that there's an opportunity to give him plenty of let's put it this way. If we are in a position where we're looking to bring Nelson on in a game, I genuinely don't think there is any game where I wouldn't bring on Nwaneri instead.
That's a shot.
This stage. So if that's where my head's at with Nelson, I'd say, yeah, I would be willing to let him leave, because any minutes that I'm giving to Nelson, I'd arguably be happier to give to Nwaneri in either of those positions, because I know he's more of kind of an attacking midfield type, but he can play in wider roles. So yeah, I think that's probably the way to explain it to anybody with that. But also, I do think that there is scope from Arsenal and a desire from Arsenal to bring in a winger. They do like Nico Williams.
I think we all do, man.
Of course, but the issue is with Nico Williams is despite it being a relatively simple transfer to do because of his release clause, there is his preference, which is Barcelona, who are a club that it would be, even though there's so much noise surrounding that transfer, the likelihood is they probably can't do it this summer. It might happen if they get in a lot of money for Rafinha, for instance.
Who's been linked to us like clockwork.
Yeah, he has been linked to us. Villa are the key player, I think, in that potential avenue. But if they get a lot of money in for Rafinha, then maybe they'll get that done. But there's always a chance. There's a small chance that Williams could end up at Arsenal, but I think it's less than 10%. But that shows a willingness from Arsenal to want to bring in a wide player. And there are others. Pedro Neto, of course, been mentioned, but his injuries are a bit of a problem. I'd love Xavi Simons, as we've talked about on my channel together before. And I think there's somebody else as well, but who slipped my mind. But Johan Bakayoko is another. The issue
that would be good for Arteta to work with.
The issue with him is that he is specifically a left-footed right winger. Like, he's not a Williams who can play on either side. He is ostensibly a right-sided, left-footed player.
And we've got Mr. Bakayo there.
Exactly. And why from the noises coming out from the Netherlands are he only wants to go somewhere where he is going to play and play regularly. And if you are a specific right-sided left-footed player, That's not going to happen at Arsenal.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah, it really doesn't for you personally. What do you make of us not signing either a striker or a winger? Because in an ideal world for me, we get that number 9 we've all dreamed of. We get someone of the Nico Williams ilk or either one. I understand, if the club don't they think they can find value for money on the market or a striker that 100% convinced them, then what's the point? But I genuinely think for me personally, we need another wide man or someone that just carries a specific number of goals or the ability to, because I think we're weird. I do think us Arsenal fans generally, we overstate the need for goals. We've got 91 goals in the Premier League, 100 odd in all comps. But at the same time, I do think to that December period, and with the greatest of respect to Kai Havertz, who is doing his thing, and as you said, it's kind of changed the thinking around that. If I'm not Mikel Arteta, but if I kind of jump 2-3 years into Arsenal, and assuming we're on this trajectory and we're not only Premier League winners, but we potentially retain it, I think Bukayo Saka is the only one I could argue that would be in what I would say a proper title winning front three. Of course, I like Kai Havertz. I hope Martinelli finds his form, but Saka's the only one I bet on. And we're a bit weird. In the last 2 years, we've scored a lot of goals, and no doubt we will next season. But for me, just based on paper, apart from Bukayo Saka, who is going to get these goals? Everyone's got the capacity to, but who is going to? And I think it's a bit unique that there's a lot of unanswered questions, but Arteta's still been able to have us fighting for a title. But what's your thinking with that?
Yeah, so I think that what we're looking at to do with kind of where we finished last season, which was obviously 2 points behind Man City, we still scored more goals than we've ever scored before in the Premier League. Across all competitions, we had a win percentage that was higher than any other Arsenal iteration in the club's history. 61.5%, I think, something like that, was our win percentage. So we're clearly doing something very right, at the moment. And also, this team is going to be a year older. We hope for some signings as well.
Bit more seasoned, yeah.
And I think where did we lose the league last season? What games do we think about where we lost the league? Well, you can point to Fulham away, which was just an overall dreadful performance. Now,
bad day at the office, to put it nicely.
I don't think that game is anything to do with transfers, anything to do with necessarily the manager.
Yeah, we were just rubbish.
We were just crap, and sometimes teams have crap days and it happens. And that was what that day was. It was just a terrible game after the West Ham game. Now, the West Ham game is more indicative of a game where you think, if we had a better centre forward,
that was like a pantomime, man.
Because we had 70 touches in the opposition box and we didn't score. There was obviously a lot of bad luck with the penalty situation. No, sorry, not the penalty situation. The Bowen, was it off the line? Was it over the line? Yeah. I personally have seen plenty enough now to think it was indeed over the line, but we still weren't clinical enough. There's obviously, with that game, there is the luck element in certain fixtures. We obviously drew against Fulham as well at the Emirates earlier in the season. We looked at that game at that time thinking, okay, we've dropped points, but we've won, every single game around them in the first, I think it was the opening 6 games, we dropped points in one. But if you're on a title race, that matters. It matters dropping just 2 points in the third game.
It all counts, as we saw on the last day of the season, unfortunately.
I think there'll be an extra nervousness next season about every game. Like I talked this season about the season just gone, about how the Emirates was far more nervy than it was in 22-23. Like 22-23 was an aura of excitement about the surprise of the title challenge. Yeah, exactly. Whereas the last season was much more expectation. So if we ever went 1-0 down like we did against Fulham, it wasn't like we saw the season before when Saliba scored that own goal against Leicester and there was the big rousing kind of retort. There was a little bit of that, but there was actually more, I think, entitlement from the Emirates crowd, which is a dangerous place to get into as a fan base. You need to make sure that you're carrying your team, and I hope that I hope they prove me wrong. Next season we don't see another dip in that. By the way, sorry if it's so loud outside. I don't know what's
no, you're good, man. You're good on my end, man.
But in terms of the other games where we ultimately dropped points, you look at the West Ham game and you look at the Newcastle game as well. And the Newcastle game this season, again, is going to be a very tough fixture. I think that to win the league, you have to beat Newcastle home and away. And Newcastle is a ground where it tests all of the big sides. Yep. And just like when you play City or when you play Liverpool, that Newcastle game is a must-win away from home, because I think they're very beatable when you play them at home, when they're without the backing of the Toon Army. But that place is so hard to go to and win.
Sums up English football, Newcastle away.
No, we didn't have absolutely. Now we didn't have Martin Odegaard that game when we went there last season because he had his concussion and hip problem. But this team, we will be stronger, I think, going into that game. I'm not sure when it is for us. I'm just going to quick scroll down the fixtures now. It's November 2nd. So it's a similar time actually to what it was last year, which was just entering the winter period. and it's just before a game against Chelsea, and it's just after a game at home against Liverpool. So it's sandwiched between two other huge fixtures. And I think that, again, those run of games, Liverpool, Newcastle, Chelsea, could be very interesting. It is also preceded by an away game at Bournemouth. I know we did very well there last season, but they became a lot better as the season went on from that point. So that might not be an easy game. And we've got early games against Spurs, early games against Man City. We've got Aston Villa away, another game, that if you're looking at fixtures last season where the title was lost, both games against Aston Villa were two of those games. Now, I think we were unlucky at Villa Park, especially with the penalty shot.
Boy, we should have had a penalty in that game, if I remember correctly, as well.
At the end, with Havertz getting very unlucky to have it just graze his hand as it was going in as well, was also really unlucky. And I thought we were the better team, actually, in that game. We weren't at home against them. I thought Villa deserved to win. We
should have killed that game in the first half, man.
But we should have killed that game in the first half when we had the chance with Trossard. So, again, finishing. And the thing is, with Trossard, he has probably been our best finisher.
He is our best finisher, in my opinion.
I agree. And I think that if you did want that chance to fall to anyone, you'd probably say you'd want it to be Trossard. So, again, I think luck hopefully will be a little bit more on our side this time, and we'll build upon what we've done this season.
I mean, everything you were saying is just, as you were speaking and I was agreeing, I just thought to myself, this just shows how difficult the level is in the present day in the Premier League. And there's no easy games in the Premier League. And it sounds cliche, but literally every game is a must win. And it's almost a double-edged sword in that, based on what Mikel Arteta and everybody says, they want to win. They know that they're in the business of competing. But it does feel like an impossible job for obvious reasons against Manchester City. Of course, as you said there's going to be more pressure on the players. I think for more than anything on Mikel Arteta, because rightly so, I do believe if you're a great manager, which I think he has the capacity to and is at the moment, people are going to ask questions if you don't necessarily attach your name to some sort of trophy. So I hope we can do it, if I'm completely honest with you. But it's difficult, man, because as you were saying there, in terms of where the games were won and lost, if I'm honest, I actually don't feel there's, and you alluded to it as well, I don't think there's a single game. I think it's all a kind of mixture of things. I think many people look at the Aston Villa game. I can't disagree with that. Rightly so. You said Newcastle, the two against Aston Villa. Obviously, Fulham did what they did. But then I also look at the top 6 games. I also look at Chelsea away, where it took us about an hour to salvage something from there, and just wonder, what if we actually played the way we should have played? I look back to the first North London derby as well, where we were great, but some silly mistakes allowed them to get back in the game. So I think it's more of a run of things across the season. And unfortunately, against Pep Guardiola in City, you can't afford to drop that many points. I wanted to ask you about Eddie Nketiah. Now, obviously, we could sign a striker, but it seems unlikely that we're going to see that striker that ticks all the boxes. Could you argue that you probably have to keep Eddie Nketiah away from needing to obviously play and make money, because Kai Havertz is there and he never gets injured, but if he does, we're in trouble. Gabriel Jesus, quality player, but needs to go back to that Jesus of the first couple of years. Could you argue there's a spot for Eddie Nketiah to play here? Be a devil's advocate.
Probably not, because I think that the most forgotten quantity about this Arsenal team is Gabriel Jesus this summer.
His stock is on the floor, man.
He's I think such a key part of this squad for next season that people are just forgetting, because there's so much clamour to bring in another forward player, particularly a centre forward. If you look at his numbers, and I know goals are the most important thing for a centre forward, but all of his metrics outside of goal scoring are elite level.
Everything you want in a Mikel Arteta striker.
Everything that you want, they are elite level. You go onto his FB ref profile, for instance, and it's all solidly green in terms of shots, assists, shot creating actions, pass completion, progressive passes, take-ons,
lovely
touches in the penalty area, tackles, interceptions, blocks. Like, all of these are in the highest they can be for players in his position. But then he sits in the 53rd percentile for non-penalty goals. And
that sums up Jesus, unfortunately.
That's Jesus right now. If Jesus had as good of a goal-scoring ability as every other element of his game, he'd probably be among the top 5 centre-forwards in the world.
And we're not having this conversation.
And we're not. And there's always that question mark about him, because he's what now, 27, 28? 27. He turns 28 not until April of next year. So he's very much in his prime going into this season. Considering we bought him 2 years ago for 45 million, you'd be thinking we'd be talking about Jesus as Arsenal's main undisputed established centre forward, but we're not, because of not only his goal scoring record not being necessarily good enough, but the injuries that have also gone alongside that as well. So this season, he obviously, from my understanding, has put a lot of work into his fitness this summer. Soon as the season ended, he was still keeping on it. He was keeping fit. He went to a training camp with Neymar in the summer. You probably saw some pictures of that.
Yeah.
He enjoyed a break. He didn't go to Marbella, to my understanding, with Arteta and the others, but obviously joined back up with the squad immediately this week for pre-season. And there are big things expected of Jesus coming into this brand new season, quite rightly too. And I think that he creates the scenario where Nketiah's role is completely obsolete, because Trossard, Havertz, Jesus, even without signing a centre forward, is a good collection of centre forward options for us to have going into next year. I hope Martinelli has a better season. I hope
Definitely
he can push Trossard out. And then Nketiah's move, hopefully somewhere maybe like Marseille, where I think it would be a good move for him. He'd replace Aubameyang, of course. And Marseille are trying to build a team that's far more competitive in Liga. They've made the signing in Greenwood as well, of course. So we'll see how that goes down. But £25 million for Nketiah, I think, would be a good amount of money if we can get from Marseille. I think it was Alan Nixon reported yesterday that they bid 20, and it's not enough. So hopefully, if it's 25, the interest is there. So if that can get done, that's 25 from Nketiah. As I said before, hopefully 15 to 20 for Nelson, and hopefully 30 to 35 for Smith Rowe. And then you can reinvest that in some other positions.
I think you're bang on the money. I've got two questions for you before I let you get out of it. First thing is, we were talking about defenders, and I forgot to mention Kivior. What's your thinking in relation to him? Is there a reality where him and Zinchenko could stay, where they both go? Or do you think, what, Kivior, it's probably, you're not going to be someone that enters the Premier League season with Arsenal?
I think that Kivior, will probably go this summer. If I was like betting, I'd be like 60-40 in favour of leave. If the Calafiori deal falls apart, that might not then happen. We may decide to keep him. I think those two are very much linked together.
They're interlinked 100%.
There was said to be Arsenal keen on including Kivior in a deal that would help lower the figure, and of course maybe that would sweeten it for Bologna regarding their sell-on clause. And apparently Kivior's not so keen on it, which surprised me actually, because Bologna are now a Champions League side. They're now managed by Italiano, who was obviously Fiorentina's previous manager, who got them to 2 Conference League finals. He's a very, very astute coach. Even though they've lost Motta to Juve, I still think it's a good move for Kivior to progress his career and play football at the Champions League
minutes
and starting. Yeah, exactly. So he would go in and straight away replace Calafiori. So I think he should be more amenable to that than apparently being reported that he is. But yeah, I think Kivior will probably go, and Arsenal should look, if he's not going in a swap deal, to get good profit from that move.
I think you're bang on the money with Kivior as well, in the sense of, I feel sorry for him, because at the end of the day, respectfully to him, you're not quite strong enough to push Gabriel. At left back, I think you'd be behind Tomiyasu, behind him, but evidently behind Calafiori. Yep. And I think for all of Zinchenko's pros and cons, I think Zinchenko will be better on the head of you. And I know Arsenal's a sweet gig. You're in London. We're doing great things, but minutes are currency. And it would be nice to go and see him play. Equally, as you said there, it'd be nice to drum up interest, because as long as the man's been at the club, links to Italian clubs haven't gone away. I don't know if links correlate to actual bids, but, simultaneously with Bologna links, you've got Juventus, Inter and AC. Whether they actually bid is another thing, but clearly there's admiration for what you did in that nation. So it's an interesting one, really and truly. I do want a bigger squad next season, because Arteta did say, I think around January, March, April, that we've got one of the smallest squads in the league, and that kind of keeps me up at night. I don't know why I hung on to those comments, really. I keep thinking about it, and I don't want that to be a thing. My last question for you would then be Mikel Moreno, man. What do you make of him? What do you think he brings to the table? Did it surprise you that, he's the central midfielder at Sociedad we're more likely to get versus Mr. Zubimendi, who collectively between us, we've probably had done so many videos on the guy?
Yeah. Moreno, right? I think the thing with Moreno is that he's very good, but he's not ever kind of been like in that world-class category, despite now being 28. And he is very much a short-term signing for Arsenal. If it happens, it's
the Jorginho Trossard kind of recruitment profile.
Exactly that, 100% that. And Partey's situation as well, like, James Bend actually reported yesterday, that there's not really been too much noise from Saudi Arabia, which is where you would have expected him to go, which, is interesting. And, I don't know if you saw Nicolas Pepe's quotes as well that came out about Saudi Arabia and a reluctance to allow him to go there. Maybe if that's true, that has something to do with it. I don't know. We know that Gabriel had some links to Saudi and Arsenal, from everywhere you putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4, I think for most fans is that's why he maybe wasn't starting at the start of last season.
I agree.
So it's interesting with Partey. I still think even if we keep Partey, if Smith Rowe goes, because a lot of people were forgetting that Smith Rowe is part of that midfield group because he can play in the left 8 position. And if he's ever coming on at the moment, he is playing in that left 8 position. He's not playing where Trossard
He's not playing off the flanks no more.
He's either being subbed for Ødegaard or he's coming on with Ødegaard in midfield. That's what we're seeing from Smith Rowe. So if Smith Rowe goes, Moreno is a replacement for Smith Rowe because he is a box-to-box player for Real Sociedad. He's one of the better box-to-box players in La Liga. He's, a high goal-scoring midfielder for his position in relative comparisons to other midfielders in his position.
He's also quite good in the air as well, which Arteta
He's excellent in the air. I think he ranks in the 99th percentile of central midfielders for aerial duels won. So he is very, very good in that regard as well. Adds the physicality that Arteta likes from his team. And he's good defensively. He's good going forward. He's good going back. But I wouldn't put him in a world-class category. I'd put him in a very good category. And I think if you're saying that you're going up against Man City and you're choosing between Smith Rowe at left 8 or Moreno,
you're going with Moreno.
So yeah, I think that's the way to look at it.
I think you're bang on the money, man. It'll be interesting. I know fans are very frustrated because fundamentally we haven't signed anyone, and logic and reason in an emotional game like football, it doesn't sell. All I would say is for me, again, obviously every day it goes on, it's not that I'll get nervous, but I'll think what's going on here. I always say every transfer window, when the market closes, I will judge what Arsenal have or haven't done. Until then, I'll give Edu and Arteta the luxury because I don't know what you're doing. I don't have your number. For all we know, Edu could be signing the next Ronaldinho, of course, an exaggeration, but everybody will get the point. So it'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to see our pre-season preparations, who goes, who comes, and that's all we can do, man. And hopefully we can push City. Tom, as you know, man, thank you for doing this. This has been fantastic. I can't imagine they don't know, but as I always ask you to do, let people know where they can find you, man.
You can find me every morning at 8 a.m. On the Gooner Talk, producing daily content and rounding up all the latest transfer news. Sometimes we do podcasts and invite fantastic people like yourself, DJ, onto the show. Thank you for having me. And you can find my written work at football.london.
You know where to find the guy. Again, people, he's flirting with 60,000 subscribers, man. He's almost there. So make sure you're subscribing, you're hitting the like button, you're checking out his morning shows. His morning shows are part of my routine. I see, it's a bit like cheating, but it's like I look at Tom's homework because he's got all the links and everything. And I'm like, okay, we'll make our content from that, man. So yeah, Tom, take care, man. Everybody in the comments, don't forget to subscribe to the platforms, comment, let us know your thoughts. I'm sure a lot of you disagree with a lot of what we've said, but yeah, I'm going to let everybody get out of here, man. Tom, bless, my guy. Peace.
Thanks, man.
Come on. You always